The transport ship descended through a thick layer of red clouds, its silver hull cutting across the alien sky like a sharp blade. The planet beneath was strange and glowing, its sands shimmering under the twin suns. To most of the human crew, this was just another escort mission. But to Darren, a ground soldier with sharp eyes and a quiet soul, something about this world felt heavier, older, almost as if it was watching him. His boots pressed against the metallic floor of the ship as he leaned closer to the viewport. The entire surface below was painted in crimson and gold. Great stone towers rose from the desert like ancient spears, and between them were wide paths carved into perfect circles. At the center of it all was the royal palace, bright with fire-lit lanterns and banners that moved with the dry wind. "This place gives me the creeps," one of the pilots whispered behind him. Darren didn't reply. He wasn't the type to talk much. His duty was simple: escort, protect, and leave. The Zarathians, an alien race known for their warrior culture, had invited a small human delegation as part of a new alliance. Darren was just part of the guard unit, nothing more. He had no interest in politics or royal ceremonies. The ship touched down on a wide landing platform made of black stone. The ramp opened with a hiss of steam, and the dry heat of the planet wrapped around them like a thick blanket. Darren adjusted the strap of his pack and stepped down with the others. The air smelled faintly of metal and burning herbs. The Zarathian guards were already waiting. Tall, broad, with silver blue skin and black markings on their arms, they stood in two long lines. Their armor shimmered under the suns, and their sharp golden eyes followed every human movement. They didn't bow, didn't smile, didn't speak. They watched. At the end of the path, a set of wide golden gates opened. A woman stepped forward. She wore golden armor trimmed with crimson fabric, and a silver crown rested on her head. Her presence was commanding, not just because of her rank, but because of the way the soldiers shifted their weight when she appeared. It was Queen Riala, the ruler of Zarathia. Darren had seen images before, but standing in front of her was different. Her posture was straight, every step quiet but powerful. She carried no weapon, but somehow Darren felt like the air itself bent to her will. The human ambassador stepped forward, bowing slightly, but Darren's attention remained on the Queen's eyes. She was not looking at the ambassador. She was looking at him. "Why is she staring?" One of the soldiers beside him muttered under his breath. Darren didn't answer. Riala tilted her head slightly as if recognizing something in him. Then with a wave of her hand, she turned and started walking toward the palace. The delegation followed. The palace grounds were covered with crimson tiles. Golden torches burned along the walls even in daylight. Intricate symbols and carvings covered every stone, showing warriors, suns, and great beasts. Darren walked silently, scanning everything like a soldier trained to notice details. But what he didn't realize was that each step he took was leading him closer to something much bigger than his mission. As they passed under a large archway, Darren accidentally stepped away from the group to avoid bumping into a Zarathian child who had run out from a side path. The child, laughing, darted around him, and Darren instinctively stepped aside to give the child space. His boot came down on a round stone circle engraved into the ground. The moment he did, the air shifted. A loud hum filled the courtyard. Flames from the torches flickered brighter. The Zarathian guards froze in place, their golden eyes widening. Riala, who had been ahead, turned sharply. Every soldier, every servant, every person in the courtyard stared at Darren. He didn't understand what had just happened. He looked down. The stone beneath his foot glowed faintly red, lines of light spreading outward in a perfect ring. The human ambassador whispered, "Darren, what did you do?" "I just stepped aside," Darren said, confused. One of the older Zarathian elders dropped to one knee, lowering his head. The others followed one by one until the entire courtyard was kneeling except the queen. Riala walked toward him slowly. The sound of her boots echoed against the stone like soft thunder. "You," she said in a clear, powerful voice, "have stepped into the sacred circle." Darren's heartbeat thudded in his chest. "I didn't mean to. I was just—" "The sacred circle is not a place of accidents," one of the guards snapped. "Silence," Riala ordered, raising a hand. Her eyes locked on Darren again, calm but unreadable. "By the law of the first son, anyone who steps into this circle during the festival becomes part of the Queen's fate." Darren frowned. "Part of your what?" The translator quickly repeated her words. The meaning hit him like a wave. Whatever ancient tradition they followed, he had just triggered it. Not on purpose, not even knowingly, but it didn't matter to them. A deep horn echoed through the city. In the distance, the crowds outside the palace cheered and shouted words Darren didn't understand. The queen didn't move away. She kept standing there close enough that he could see the fine lines of her golden crown. "The prophecy is fulfilled," the elder whispered. "The chosen one has arrived," the ambassador tried to argue. "There must be a misunderstanding. He is just a soldier." "He's not," but Riala raised her hand again. "The prophecy does not ask for rank. It does not ask for blood. It asks for presence. And he is here." Darren felt his chest tighten. He was a soldier, not a chosen one, not a leader. He came here to protect the delegation, not to become part of some alien ritual. But around him, hundreds of Zarathians had already accepted it as truth. The queen stepped forward until she was only a few feet from him. Her golden eyes studied him closely, like someone who had spent years imagining this moment and now stood face to face with it. "You stand in the sacred circle," she said slowly. "From this moment, your life is tied to the fate of Zarathia." He swallowed. "I didn't choose this." "And yet," she replied calmly, "the stars did." The humans were taken to the guest chambers inside the palace. Darren was placed under special guard, though they didn't treat him like a prisoner. Zarathian guards followed him everywhere, their faces expressionless but their eyes always on him. At night he sat by the balcony staring at the red sky. The stars above the planet were brighter than Earth's, as if the universe was too close. He thought about home, about how this was supposed to be a simple mission, but nothing about this felt simple anymore. Outside, the palace drums beat softly. Down below, he saw thousands of Zarathians gathered with glowing lanterns, singing ancient songs. It wasn't for the humans. It was for him, the chosen warrior. In the royal chamber, Riala stood before a round table with her council. "This is dangerous," one of the council members said. "He is not one of us. The people may not accept it." "The people will accept what the stars command," another replied. Riala's voice cut through their argument. "I will not ignore the prophecy." The circle glowed. The signs were clear. "But he is human," the elder woman said. "A foreigner." Riala closed her eyes for a moment. In truth, she too had doubts. Since childhood, she had been told a figure would step into the sacred circle during the Festival of Suns. This figure would either lead their world to unity or throw it into great conflict. She had imagined many things over the years: Zarathian warriors, noble bloodlines, heroes from the stars. But never had she imagined a quiet, calm human soldier. Back in his chamber, Darren sat alone. He could hear the sounds of celebration outside, but he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. A Zarathian guard stepped into the room. "Queen Riala summons you." He followed through silent corridors lined with golden torches. The queen stood on a high balcony overlooking the glowing city. She didn't turn as he approached. "You do not believe in destiny," she said without looking at him. "I believe in choices," Darren replied simply. She finally turned to face him. "Then maybe, soldier, you will have to make one very soon." For the first time, Darren saw something in her eyes that wasn't command or power. It was weight, the weight of someone bound by a path too old to change. The drums grew louder outside. The sky burned crimson under the twin suns, and without fully understanding how, Darren had become a part of a fate written long before he was born. The night on Zarathia was never truly dark. Even when the sun set, the crimson clouds glowed faintly, lighting the palace walls with a soft red shine. Torches burned all across the city, and chants of celebration echoed through the streets. To the Zarathians, this night was sacred. To Darren, it felt like being trapped in a story he didn't belong to. He stood on the balcony of his assigned chamber, wearing the same simple soldier's uniform. Down below, crowds were still gathered in the wide square. They held golden lanterns shaped like suns and sang old songs that rose like warm wind into the night sky. He didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. They believed something important had begun. Darren ran a hand through his short brown hair. He was tired, but his mind wouldn't rest. He hadn't chosen any of this. One small step, one accidental move, and now an entire world saw him as part of a prophecy. He thought about walking out, demanding a shuttle back to his ship. But deep down he knew it wouldn't be that easy. A soft knock came from the door. When he turned, he saw a tall Zarathian guard step in. The guard wore black armor with silver stripes, and his golden eyes were sharp. "The Queen summons you," the guard said in a calm but firm voice. Darren followed through silent hallways lined with long red curtains and glowing crystals. The palace at night felt different, less like a royal place and more like a living heart beating with old stories. They reached a great chamber with a high ceiling and walls carved with images of warriors, suns, and beasts. Queen Riala was already there, standing near a round stone platform. She wore a long crimson cloak, and her golden crown reflected the light of the crystals above. When Darren stepped inside, the guards bowed and stepped back, leaving only the two of them in the center. Riala's eyes were calm, but there was a quiet fire behind them. She didn't see him like the others did. She didn't see a god or savior. She saw a question she didn't know how to answer. "You look restless, human," she said softly. "I am," Darren replied. "I didn't ask for this. You stepped into the sacred circle. I stepped aside so a child wouldn't fall. That is how fate works," Riala said, turning slightly toward the glowing stone floor. "It does not ask permission." Darren folded his arms. "Back on my world, fate isn't something that decides everything for you. People make their own choices." Her golden eyes narrowed, not in anger but curiosity. "And yet here you are, chosen by an old prophecy you do not believe in." He didn't answer. Riala began to walk slowly around the platform. Her voice was steady, almost ceremonial. "Centuries ago," she began, "when our world was torn by war, the first queen of Zarathia stood here and made a vow to the stars. She asked for a guide, not a ruler, not a slave, but a warrior who would appear in a time of great change. That warrior would share the queen's fate. Together they would lead our world into a new era. And now," Darren said quietly, "you think that's me?" Riala didn't say yes, but she didn't need to. The silence around her was enough. "The bond ceremony must take place soon," she said. "It is the law of Zarathia. If we do not complete it, the people will believe the prophecy was false. That would lead to unrest and war." Darren stepped back slightly. "Bond ceremony? What does that even mean?" "It means our destinies will be linked. What happens to one affects the other. The people will accept you as part of my fate. You will no longer be just a visitor. You will be a symbol." Darren felt a weight settle on his chest. He wasn't trained for this. He was a soldier who followed orders, not a leader who carried the future of an alien world. "There has to be another way," he said. "There is not," Riala replied. "Not in the eyes of my people. They believe what they saw, the sacred circle glowing beneath your feet. That is enough." Later that night, Darren was led through the palace by a young Zarathian woman named Mira, who served in the queen's court. She had soft silver-blue skin and gentle eyes, unlike the stern guards. "You are troubled," Mira said as they walked. "You think?" Darren replied with a tired smile. "You should not fight the prophecy," she said. "The stars have chosen." "The stars didn't choose," he said firmly. "I was just in the wrong place." She tilted her head, puzzled. "On Zarathia there are no wrong places. Only paths meant to be." Her words, though soft, made him feel even more trapped. They brought him to a large chamber with high pillars and a circular floor of white stone. Carvings of suns and warriors covered every surface. In the center was a golden basin filled with glowing water. "This is the Chamber of Destiny," Mira explained. "Tomorrow the council will stand here and ask the stars for a sign. If the bond is true, the light will shine again. And if it doesn't," Mira's expression darkened, "then the people will lose faith. And when Zarathians lose faith, they fight." Darren looked up at the ceiling where tiny lights mimicked the stars. He had fought in battles before, but this was different. A single choice here could affect millions of lives. The next morning, the palace buzzed with movement. Royal banners hung from every wall. Musicians played strange instruments in the courtyards. The people outside were already gathering for what they called the Binding of Suns. In the throne room, Riala met with the council. The elders wore long black robes with gold stitching. Their faces were painted with lines that represented their status. One of them, a tall man with deep markings across his jaw, stepped forward. "Queen Riala," he said, "the prophecy is clear. The humans stepped into the circle at the hour of the first sun. The stars have chosen. But some among us question this bond." Another elder added, "He is not Zarathian." The people may see this as a sign of weakness. Riala's voice remained calm. The people will see what I show them. And I will show them strength. The tall elder frowned. Then the trial of honor must be held. The prophecy demands proof. The room fell silent. Darren, who was standing near the door with 2 guards, narrowed his eyes. Trial of honor? He whispered to Mira. She leaned closer. It is a test. If you pass, the bond is sealed. If you fail.
The prophecy is broken. What kind of test?
Only the queen and the stars decide. Riala turned toward him then, her cloak flowing like a river of fire. You heard, she said. The trial of honor will decide if your place in the prophecy is real. Darren clenched his fists. I didn't ask to be part of this. I didn't ask for it either, she said softly, for the first time letting her voice show a hint of human-like emotion. But the path is set. By evening, Darren was brought to the Hall of the First Warriors, where the trial would begin at dawn. The hall was carved into the base of the palace, deep underground. Its walls were lined with ancient weapons and shields. A long stone bench faced an open archway that led to the storm plains, a dangerous area outside the city where the test would take place. 2 guards placed a simple black armor chestplate in front of him. It was lighter than Zarathian armor, but stronger than human fabric. He ran his hands over the smooth surface, feeling the weight of the moment. Mira stood nearby. Many warriors have faced this trial, she said. Some returned. Some did not. Comforting, Darren said dryly. You have something they did not. What? She smiled softly. The stars. He almost laughed at that. He didn't believe in stars choosing his destiny. But he also couldn't walk away. If he left, war could break out. Innocent people could die because of something he didn't even mean to do. He wasn't a leader, but he was a soldier, and soldiers didn't run from duty. Late that night, Riala entered the hall. She was alone, without her crown or armor. For the first time, she looked less like a queen and more like a person carrying a heavy burden. You should rest, she said. Darren looked up at her. How can you stay so calm? She walked to one of the old shields on the wall and touched it lightly. I was raised to believe in the prophecy. I was told it would bring either glory or destruction. When I saw you step into the circle, I didn't know whether to feel fear or hope. I'm just a soldier, he said quietly. Maybe that's why the stars chose you. He shook his head. I don't believe in destiny. Then believe in the lives that depend on it. For a long moment, they stood in silence. 2 people from different worlds, both caught in something larger than themselves. Outside, the drums of the festival beat like a distant heartbeat. The suns had set, but the red glow still covered the city. Darren finally sat down, letting out a slow breath. Tomorrow, he would walk out into a storm plain he had never seen, face a trial meant for warriors of a world not his own, and prove a bond he didn't ask for. But inside, something was changing. It wasn't belief, not yet. It was resolve. He had faced danger before. He had fought wars. He could face this too. Riala stepped closer to the doorway, her cloak trailing behind her. Tomorrow, when the sun rises, the world will watch you. And if I fall, then we fall together, she said softly. Darren looked at her, surprised. She didn't sound like a queen then. She sounded like someone ready to stand beside him, not above him. For the first time since he stepped on this planet, the weight on his chest didn't feel quite as crushing. The first light of the twin suns broke over the red horizon, turning the city of Zarathia into a sea of fire and gold. The wind carried the sound of drums beating through the streets, steady and deep, like the heartbeat of the world itself. Crowds had gathered along the palace walls, their golden lanterns swaying in the early morning breeze. Today was the trial of honor. Inside the underground hall, Darren sat on a stone bench, tightening the straps of the simple black armor given to him. It wasn't as strong as Zarathian armor, but it was light and it allowed him to move quickly. His hands moved steadily, but his heart beat hard against his chest. He had faced danger before, on faraway battlefields in burning cities and under alien skies. But this was different. This wasn't just survival. This was proving himself to an entire world that didn't believe in him. The heavy doors opened and Mira, the young Zarathian attendant, stepped inside. She carried a folded black sash in her hands. This is for you, she said softly. Warriors wear it to face the trial. He looked at the cloth. I'm not one of your warriors. Today, she replied, you are. Darren took the sash and tied it around his arm. Mira stepped back, studying him with a mix of worry and quiet faith. When you face the plains, remember, this is not about strength. It is about spirit. Zerathia respects those who do not break. Darren gave a small nod. I don't plan on breaking. Up above, the great gates of the Storm Plains arena opened with a deep echoing sound. It was not like a human stadium. It was vast, carved directly into the desert rock, its edges lined with tall stone spires carved with ancient symbols. Thousands of Zerathians filled the seats, their voices rising into a steady chant. At the center of the arena, a long black stone path led out to the open desert, where the trial would truly begin. This was not a contained battle. It was a test against the wild lands themselves. Queen Riala stood at the royal balcony. She wore her golden armor, but her crown was replaced by a warrior's circlet. Her golden eyes followed Darren as he walked out beneath the suns. The crowd grew silent. Every step he took echoed through the air. The High Elder stepped forward, his voice strong and ceremonial. By the will of the First Queen and the stars above, the trial of honor begins. The one who claims the bond must face the storm and return before the final horn. If he fails, the prophecy falls. Darren stopped at the edge of the black stone path. A guard handed him a short blade made of Zerathian steel, sharp but light. It wasn't much, just enough to defend himself. He slid it into a strap on his thigh. Mira stood behind the barrier, her hands clenched together. She whispered something in Zerathian, a quiet wish for his return. Riala stepped forward on the balcony, raising her hand. Begin. The ground rumbled as the great gates opened wide. A rush of hot air and red dust swept through the arena as Darren stepped out into the storm plains. The landscape beyond was brutal. Rolling red sand, tall stone arches and sharp black rocks jutting from the ground. The wind howled through the arches, carrying dry heat that made it hard to breathe. Far in the distance, dark clouds twisted together in a slow spiral. That was the storm. The trial required him to cross the plains, touch the Stone of Suns, and return before the final horn. It sounded simple, but Darren could already see movement in the distance. The storm plains were alive. He moved carefully, keeping low and scanning the horizon. The sand shifted beneath his boots. His military training kicked in. Watch your steps, keep your balance, and stay calm. A shadow passed above. Darren looked up to see a large winged creature circling against the sun. Its wings were wide, its body lean and sharp. Mira had warned him of this. The Sky Hunters. They preyed on anything that moved in the storm plains. The creature dove suddenly. Darren rolled to the side as sharp claws sliced the sand where he had been standing. The Sky Hunter screeched and circled again. He drew his blade, holding it low. When it came again, Darren didn't try to fight with brute force. Instead, he waited until the last second, ducked low and slashed upward at its wing joint. The blade cut through the membrane, not deep but enough to make the creature scream and veer away. It disappeared into the clouds, leaving a trail of dust behind. Darren breathed hard, steadying himself. One down, he muttered. The farther he walked, the stronger the wind became. Red sand whipped against his armor, scratching his face and stinging his eyes. But through the storm he saw it, the Stone of Suns. A giant pillar of black crystal, glowing faintly at its base, standing tall at the center of a wide circle of cracked ground. As he approached, he heard a low growl. From the shadows of the stone arches, something large moved. Two yellow eyes opened. A massive creature stepped out. 4 legs thick like tree trunks, skin like rough stone, long tusks curved from its mouth. Its breath came out in hot clouds of steam. It was the guardian beast, the final test of the trial. In the stands far away, the Zerathian crowd roared, some in excitement, some in fear. No one had expected the beast to appear this early in the trial. Riala's eyes narrowed. She knew this was no ordinary test. The storm plains were unpredictable. Darren crouched slightly, tightening his grip on the blade. Of course, he whispered to himself. It couldn't be easy. The guardian roared, shaking the ground. It charged like a falling mountain. Darren sprinted to the side, rolling behind a broken pillar. Dust exploded as the beast crashed through where he had been. It turned its massive head toward him, snorting hot air. He moved fast, using the broken stones for cover. He couldn't match its strength, but he could outthink it. He threw a small rock to the far left. The beast swung its head that way and roared. Darren used that moment to move behind it. He climbed onto a jagged rock and jumped toward the back of its neck. Landing hard and gripping its rough skin, the beast thrashed, but Darren held on, jamming his blade deep into a weak spot behind its tusk. It howled, rearing up. He jumped off just in time, rolling away as it slammed into a stone wall. The wall cracked and collapsed on top of it. A cloud of dust filled the air. When it cleared, the beast lay stunned, breathing heavily but no longer attacking. Darren didn't finish it. He didn't need to. This was a trial, not a war. He walked to the Stone of Suns. The glowing crystal hummed softly as he touched it. A pulse of golden light spread outward, lighting up the cracked ground beneath him. In the distance, the horns from the arena echoed. The people had seen the light. He had completed the first part, but the storm wasn't done. As he turned back, dark clouds closed in fast. The storm winds roared louder, lifting the sand into violent whirlwinds. It was like walking through a burning desert storm. The path back disappeared beneath waves of red dust. Darren pulled his arm over his face and pushed forward. The wind slammed against him, each step heavier than the last. A sudden gust knocked him down to one knee, but he gritted his teeth and forced himself up. He thought of the faces watching from the arena. He thought of Riala's calm, steady eyes. He thought of how walking away would lead to war. "I'm not quitting," he growled. He moved through the storm with slow, steady steps. He used the glowing towers in the distance as his guide. The Sky Hunter returned once, wounded but angry. This time he didn't dodge. He raised a broken piece of stone like a shield, letting the creature slam into it. It staggered, giving him just enough time to strike with the blade. The hunter fell and didn't rise again. In the arena, the crowd grew restless. The horns of time had sounded twice already. If Darren didn't return before the third, the prophecy would be considered broken. Some of the elders began to whisper. "He is human," one said. "He cannot survive." But Queen Riala stood tall, her hands on the edge of the balcony, her eyes fixed on the storm. She did not blink. She did not turn away. Mira clutched the railing near the lower steps, whispering, "Come back." The third horn began to rise. The sound was deep and slow, echoing across the plains. And then, a figure appeared through the red storm. Covered in dust, blood on his arm, armor scratched but standing. Darren walked forward, blade in hand. He didn't run. He walked with the quiet, strong steps of someone who refused to be beaten. The horn stopped. The crowd fell silent. Then a wave of cheers exploded like thunder. The Zarathians rose to their feet, chanting his name, not in their language but in one voice. He had done what many thought he couldn't. Darren stopped at the center of the arena and looked up. Riala stood above, her golden eyes bright in the sunlight. For the first time since he had met her, she smiled. A small but real smile. The elder stepped forward, raising his staff. "The trial of honor is complete. The bond is true." Mira ran toward him as the guards opened the gate. "You did it," she said, her voice shaking with relief. He gave a tired laugh. "Yeah, I noticed." Riala came down from the balcony, her cloak flowing behind her. She approached him slowly, the crowd parting to let her through. Standing before him, she lifted her hand and touched the sash tied around his arm. "The storm tested you," she said, "but you did not bend." "I'm still standing," he said simply. The queen turned to face the people. "The prophecy stands. The warrior has proved his bond," the Zarathians shouted again, louder this time. For the first time, Darren didn't feel like an intruder. He didn't feel like someone who just made a mistake. He felt seen. That night, the city of Zarathia burned bright with celebration. Lanterns floated into the sky, music filled the streets, and warriors beat their shields in rhythm. In the royal hall, Darren sat quietly near the edge, not used to so many eyes on him. Mira laughed as she placed a cup of cool water in front of him. "They love you now," she said. He gave a small shrug. "They love the prophecy." "No," she said softly. "They love the warrior who faced the storm." At the head of the hall, Riala sat on her throne, but she was not distant. Her gaze found him across the room. This time it was not the look of a queen observing a stranger. It was the look of someone who saw him as part of something real. Later, as the night wind blew through the open arches, Darren stood alone outside the palace, looking at the stars. He still didn't believe in destiny, but he had walked through a storm, faced a beast and returned when no one believed he would. And for the first time, the bond between him and Zarathia didn't feel like a mistake. The Zarathian capital was quiet that night. The great towers stood tall beneath the light of the twin moons. The city looked peaceful from above, but inside the palace walls, tension grew like a rising storm. Darren stood on the balcony of his guest chamber, his eyes fixed on the glowing skyline. For the first time since he had arrived on this world, the night air felt different, colder, heavier. He didn't know why, but something inside him whispered that danger was near. Below the balcony, the gardens of the royal palace stretched wide like a living maze. The alien flowers opened only at night, filling the air with silver mist. Darren could hear distant footsteps of royal guards patrolling the halls. He had begun to learn the rhythm of this place, and tonight, the rhythm felt wrong. Some steps were lighter, too quick, too careful. He narrowed his eyes. Darren had faced enemies before, on Earth, in the cold of space, on other worlds. He knew how silence felt before a fight. He rested his hand on the belt where he kept the short plasma blade the Queen's Council had given him after the trial. He had earned their respect that day, but he also knew respect did not mean trust. In another part of the palace, Queen Riala walked down a long hallway with 2 royal guards behind her. Her golden armor was covered by a long black cloak to keep attention away. She had just finished a late council meeting, where the elders argued about Darren's presence again. Some believed the prophecy, others called it an accident that should be undone before it broke their traditions. She had defended him, but she could feel the resistance growing stronger. Riala stopped near a tall window and looked outside. The balcony lights were on in Darren's chamber. She knew he couldn't sleep. She had begun to understand this human soldier's way of thinking. He was quiet, but not weak. She admired his strength, not the loud kind, but the kind that came from never backing down. As the night grew darker, 6 figures slipped through the outer wall. They moved like shadows, dressed in dark Zerathian robes that hid their faces. They belonged to the Iron Faction, nobles who had sworn to stop the bond between the Queen and the human. They believed the prophecy was a lie that would weaken their people. One of them whispered, "End him before the bond ceremony." End this fate. The shadows split into 2 groups. 3 went toward the garden. 3 moved along the upper corridors toward Darren's room. Darren stepped back from the balcony. His instincts screamed louder now. The air no longer felt still, it felt alive with danger. He quietly walked to the door and locked it from inside. He dimmed the lights, letting only the moonlight shine through. Then he moved to a corner where he could watch both the balcony and the door. His breathing slowed. Then he saw it. A faint movement in the shadows of the balcony railing. A figure climbed silently, its blade catching a small line of moonlight. Darren didn't wait. He reached for the plasma blade, pressing the activation button. The blue light hummed softly in his hand. The first attacker jumped onto the balcony, expecting to find Darren unprepared. Instead, he found a soldier already waiting. Darren swung low, forcing the attacker to step back. Their blades clashed with a sharp sound. Sparks flashed in the night. The alien moved fast, but Darren's training was sharper. He blocked, stepped in, and pushed the attacker against the wall. Another figure followed. Darren turned his body sideways, using the first attacker as a shield. A plasma dart hit the alien's back. The enemy fell silent. Darren didn't speak a word. On the lower level, the 3 attackers in the garden moved carefully through the mist, heading toward the main entrance of the royal wing. They expected the human to be slow and unaware. What they didn't expect was Riala moving through the halls with her guards. Riala heard the distant sound of a blade clash from Darren's balcony. Her heart jumped. She gave a quick hand signal. "With me," she ordered the guards. Her voice was sharp like steel. The attackers reached the main entrance, but as they stepped through the mist, they saw golden armor shining in the moonlight. Riala blocked their way. Her cloak fell to the ground. "You chose the wrong night," she said, raising her spear. The Iron Faction fighters hesitated for a moment. This was their queen, but their hatred burned stronger than loyalty. They charged forward. The first swung a long blade toward her. Riala spun aside and struck the side of his armor with her spear. It cracked loudly. The second tried to flank her, but her guards moved in, forming a circle around her. The fight exploded in the garden, blades flashing, footsteps pounding on the stone floor. Meanwhile, Darren blocked the balcony door with a chair and turned to face the second attacker. The alien lunged forward. Darren stepped sideways and struck the alien's wrist, knocking the weapon out of its hand. Then he kicked it back, slamming the enemy into the balcony railing. The third attacker jumped in from above, aiming at Darren's back. But Darren had already shifted his stance. He rolled forward, and the attacker landed hard on the floor. Darren turned quickly, grabbed the enemy's wrist, and pinned him down. The attacker hissed in Zarathian language, but Darren didn't care. He pressed the blade against the alien's neck, not to harm, but to warn. Riala's guards were skilled, but the Iron Faction fighters were trained assassins. One of the guards fell with a cry. Riala caught the attacker's neck strike with her spear, spun around and slammed the other with a powerful blow. She fought with strength and grace, her golden armor shining like a star under the moon. Suddenly, one of the attackers shouted, "The human must not live." Riala's eyes hardened. She understood now it wasn't just about her throne. They wanted Darren dead. Without thinking twice, she broke away from the fight and ran toward the royal wing. Darren heard footsteps rushing down the hallway. For a moment, he wasn't sure if it was more enemies. Then the door burst open and Riala entered with her spear. Her eyes scanned the room. She saw 2 enemies down and one pinned under Darren's blade. He looked at her and gave a short nod. She stepped forward and pointed her spear at the attacker's throat. "Surrender," she commanded. The attacker hissed but didn't move. Behind her, more guards arrived, taking control of the situation. But outside, the garden still burned with chaos. The last of the Iron Faction fighters tried to escape. Riala and Darren rushed out together. He followed her through the corridor, his boots hitting the marble floor. The sounds of battle echoed through the halls. When they reached the garden, they saw one assassin trying to climb over the wall. Darren didn't hesitate. He grabbed a fallen spear from the ground and threw it with a strong arm. The spear hit the wall beside the attacker, blocking the escape path. Riala jumped forward, knocking the enemy down with a final strike. The garden went silent, except for the sound of wind and heavy breathing. The guards surrounded the fallen attackers. Riala walked to the center of the garden. She removed her helmet and looked at Darren. The moonlight reflected on her pale blue skin. For the first time, there was no distance between them, only shared strength. "You fought well," she said. Darren wiped sweat from his forehead. "So did you," he replied. She turned to the captured attackers. "Who sent you?" she asked sharply. But the leader only laughed, a cold, bitter laugh. "You can't stop what's coming," he said. "The bond will end. The human will fall." The guards dragged them away. Riala walked beside Darren as the night wind blew through the garden. "This was no random attack," she said. "They were waiting for the right moment." Darren nodded slowly. "They don't want the bond to happen." She looked at him, her eyes sharp yet calm. "They fear change. You are not just a stranger to them. You are a storm they cannot control." For a long moment they stood in silence. Above them, the moons moved across the sky. The palace, once a place of whispers, now felt alive with unseen threats. That night a line was drawn in Zarathia. The Iron Faction had revealed itself. Riala knew that the road ahead would not be peaceful. But when she looked at Darren standing firm at her side, something inside her felt unshakable. He was no longer just the human caught in a prophecy. He was part of the fight now, and the enemies hiding in the shadows had made their first mistake. They had come for Darren, and now the queen stood beside him. The night ended, but the war inside the palace had just begun. The sun rose over the crimson world of Zarathia like a glowing fireball. Its light painted the towers of the palace in gold and red. The city below woke slowly, unaware that its future was about to change forever. Inside the palace, everything was silent but tense. The news of the attack during the night had already reached every corner of the kingdom. The Iron Faction had made their move, but they had failed. In the royal courtyard, banners of the Queen's house were raised high, their fabric moving with the morning wind. Soldiers lined the walls with serious faces. Priests in silver robes walked through the corridors, preparing for the bond ceremony that would decide everything. For the Zarathian people, this ceremony was more than a tradition. It was a promise to their ancestors and their stars. Darren stood in a quiet chamber near the Grand Hall. He wore the ceremonial armor they had given him, black metal with silver edges, lighter than his old combat suit but strong enough to feel real. His reflection in the polished wall surprised him. Just a few weeks ago, he was a human soldier sent to guard a transport. Now, he was standing in the center of a prophecy he never asked for. He looked down at the plasma blade hanging from his side. It wasn't just a weapon now. It was a symbol. The Zarathians respected him not because of where he came from, but because of what he had done, fighting in the trial, protecting their queen, and facing enemies in the dark. But deep inside, Darren was still unsure. The bond ceremony was not a small thing. If he stepped into the circle today, he would no longer be just a guest. He would be tied to this world and its queen forever. A knock came on the door. He turned, expecting a guard. Instead, it was Queen Riala. She entered wearing a ceremonial white robe over her golden armor. The light caught the sharp lines of her armor, making her look like a figure from the old legends. Her face was calm, but Darren could see something behind her eyes, a mix of strength and something softer. "You're ready," she said quietly. He gave a small nod. "As ready as I can be." Riala walked closer, stopping just a step away from him. Last night proved that this bond is not just about tradition. It is a battle for the future. Some will stand with us. Others will fight against us. But if you step into that circle today, everything will change. For me, for you, for Zarathia. Darren looked at her. "And if I don't?" "Then the bond will break," she said, her voice steady but heavy. "It will divide the people. The Iron Faction will rise. They will claim the prophecy was false. The peace we have now will be gone." He turned his gaze toward the window. The view outside was endless, a red horizon under a burning sun. He had never planned to become part of another world's fate. But when he remembered the people who had stood beside him, the soldiers who had trusted him and the queen who had fought at his side, something in him began to settle. Riala watched him closely. "I will not command you," she said. "Fate is not real if it is forced. The choice must be yours." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Darren took a deep breath and said, "I'll stand in the circle. But not because of prophecy. Because I've seen what's at stake." A faint smile touched Riala's lips. Not one of triumph, but one of respect. "Then we will face this together." The great ceremonial hall of Zarathia was built from shining black stone, polished so well it reflected the faces of those who entered. Golden symbols of their ancestors lined the walls. At the center of the hall was the sacred circle, a glowing ring of white light carved deep into the floor. It had existed for centuries, used only for bonds that shaped the destiny of their world. The council sat on high seats. Hundreds of soldiers and citizens gathered in the outer space of the hall, their eyes on the circle. The atmosphere was thick with whispers and expectation. Some were curious, some were afraid, and some were angry. The Iron Faction was not gone. Many of its supporters stood in the crowd, their faces hidden behind polite masks. They waited, hoping the human would refuse, hoping the prophecy would break. When Darren entered the hall, the whispers grew louder. Some called him a hero, others called him an outsider. He walked through the center aisle, feeling every eye on him. But his steps were steady. He had walked into battles before, but this moment was heavier than any battlefield. Riala entered after him. Her golden armor shone bright under the crystal lights hanging above. The priests followed, carrying ancient artifacts, symbols of stars, fire, and unity. The high priest raised his voice. "Today, the sacred circle shall witness the binding of two fates. The Queen of Zarathia and the chosen one of the prophecy stand before the stars. May the bond bring strength or reveal weakness. The choice is their own." The lights dimmed slightly and the white glow of the circle grew brighter. Riala stepped in first, standing with her head high. Darren followed, his boots touching the glowing floor. The air inside the circle felt different, warm and alive, as if the stars themselves were watching. The crowd went silent. The high priest spoke again. "Darren of Earth, do you accept the bond of fate with our queen, knowing it will tie your name to Zarathia forever?" Darren looked at Riala. For a second, the noise around them disappeared. There was only the sound of their breathing and the faint hum of the glowing circle. "Yes," he said simply. A ripple of shock moved through the hall. Some cheered. Some gasped. Some clenched their fists in silent rage. The high priest turned to Riala. "Riala, Queen of Zarathia, do you accept this bond with the human warrior, knowing that it will change the path of your people?" Riala's voice was clear and strong. "I accept." The circle flared with light. Golden streams rose from the floor and wrapped around their wrists like flowing threads. It didn't hurt, it was warm like sunlight. The threads tied them together in a way words could not describe. The Zarathians believed this moment was the will of the stars, Suddenly, a loud noise echoed through the hall. One of the Iron Faction supporters jumped forward, shouting, "This is a lie!" He drew a weapon, but before he could step closer, the royal guards caught him. The high priest raised his hand, and the hall fell silent again. "The stars have spoken," he declared. "The bond is sealed. The queen and the human are one in fate. Anyone who stands against this stands against Zerathia itself." The golden light faded slowly, leaving behind the mark of the bond on both Darren and Riala's wrists, a star shape that glowed faintly. The bond ceremony was complete. Later that day, the queen and Darren stood together on the palace balcony overlooking the city. A huge crowd had gathered outside the palace gates. They were not fighting. They were not shouting. They were watching. Riala raised her hand and the crowd quieted. "People of Zerathia," she said, her voice carried by the speakers across the plaza. "Today, the stars witnessed a choice, not of fate, but of will." The human warrior stood in the circle not because of fear, but because he believes in what we can build together. The crowd murmured. "We are stronger together than divided," she continued. "The Iron Faction tried to break us, but they failed. Today is the beginning of something new." Darren stepped forward beside her. He was not a king, not a ruler. But the people needed to see him. "I didn't come here to rule," he said, his voice calm and clear. "I came here to stand. I will fight beside your people, not above them." His words reached the soldiers in the front, the workers in the back, and even the nobles watching from their towers. The cheering began slowly, then grew louder. Flags waved in the air. The people shouted the queen's name. They shouted the warrior's name. Far below, hidden in the shadows, the Iron Faction leaders watched. They were silent, their faces hard. The bond was done. Their plan to stop it had failed. But their eyes said one thing clearly. The fight was not over. Riala looked at Darren, her expression calm but filled with something deeper. "They will come again," she said softly. "I know," he answered. "And when they do, they won't face just me. They'll face all of us." She turned to face the horizon, the red sun shining over the world. The bond mark on her wrist glowed faintly in the light. It was more than a symbol. It was a promise. Darren stood beside her, no longer a stranger, no longer just a soldier from another world. He was part of something bigger, something that could shape the future of two civilizations. The people below cheered louder. The wind carried their voices across the palace, across the city, and across the crimson fields beyond. The prophecy was no longer just words carved in stone. It was alive. And this time it was built on choice, not chance. The bond of the queen and the human warrior had begun. The stars, silent witnesses, burned brighter over Zerathia as if they, too, were watching the future unfold. And for the first time since his ship crashed on this world, Darren felt no confusion, no fear, only a clear path ahead. A path he had chosen. Fate was no longer just a story. It was his.